and the winter morning was bitter in Queens. Frost feathered the edges of the cracked window pane as Sandra Alvarez sat curled on the frayed edge of her mattress. The radiator in the corner hissed but gave off little warmth. She held a small worn voice recorder in her hand. Silver paint-chipped buttons sticky from time and wear. With a soft click, a familiar voice filled the silence. "Study, my daughter. Study so you can escape the shadow they built for you." Her mother's voice was grainy but unmistakable. Steady and strong even in its last recording. Sandra closed her eyes. Those words had become her ritual. Her armor. She placed the recorder gently on the nightstand. Stood up and began dressing for work. The clock read 400 am. Another day. By 5:30, she was already walking through the back entrance of the Astoria Grand Hotel. A towering 5-star relic on the Upper East Side. Polished to perfection on the outside. Quiet and cold behind the staff doors. Her ID badge clipped to her faded uniform read Housekeeping S. Alvarez. Her shoulders hunched out of habit. Her steps quick but quiet. People rarely looked her in the eye. It was fine, it gave her time to listen. To observe. She started her shift on the 11th floor. Executive suites, high-paying guests in rooms that smelled like old money and expensive perfume. Sandra moved quickly through each suite. Dusting crystal chandeliers. Scrubbing marble counters. Smoothing imported linens. She had mastered invisibility. But invisibility had a price. Some days she forgot what her own voice sounded like. Her one luxury, her rebellion against obscurity, was the language French. Beautiful, why to thank you for joining me. Layered, melodic. After every shift, instead of going home, she took the Q train to the Brooklyn Public Library, where she studied until closing. She sat in the language corner with her headphones, her notebooks and a borrowed grammar book older than her. It was the only place she felt free. That day, at noon, Sandra microwaved rice and beans in the tiny break room tucked behind the service elevator. The lunchroom was empty. She sat by the window, Tupperware in one hand, her phone in the other. A notification buzzed in. Mary Ann Lyon. "You did it. C1 level." Her breath caught. She tapped to call instantly. "Marianne," she said. The voice on the other end was excited. "Yes. You passed. Sandra. You are officially certified C1 in French." Sandra covered her mouth, laughing through the tears forming in her eyes. Then switching fluently into French. "That can't be true. Are you serious?" Marianne laughed. "Of course. You earned it. After everything. You did it." Sandra continued in French, her voice flowing with warmth and disbelief. "Oh my God. Marianne, you have no idea what this means to me. All those nights at the library. The sleepless mornings. I can't believe it." She was so engrossed in the moment that she did not notice the door behind her creak open. She did not see the man who paused just inside the frame, who stopped mid-step, silently observing her as if he had stumbled into a dream he could not place. Henry Remington stood tall, dressed in a dark tailored suit. No tie, hair slightly tousled as if he had run a hand through it and thought. He was not the kind of man people interrupted. And yet now he was the one who had interrupted. Frozen by the sound of French pouring effortlessly from the mouth of a girl in a gray housekeeping uniform, Sandra continued, unaware of his presence. Still speaking in French. "You know, I promised my mother. I told her I would speak like diplomats. That I would get out of this life. Today, it's real." Marianne's voice, light and proud, came through the phone. "And you'll do even more." Henry finally cleared his throat. Sandra jolted upright, her phone dropping into her lap. She spun around, color draining from her face. Monsieur, I am sorry," she stammered in English. "I was just on my break." Henry held up a hand gently. "No need to apologize," he said, voice measured. I heard you speaking French flawlessly. I might add." Sandra swallowed hard, her heart thumping in her chest. I studied it on my own at the library." "You sounded like a native," he said, eyeing her with quiet intensity. "What's your name?" "Sandra? Sandra Alvarez." Thank you, Sandra," he said after a pause. "Enjoy your lunch." He gave a small nod and turned, leaving just as silently as he arrived. Sandra sat frozen. The room felt too small, her heart beat too loud. She stared down at her phone, still buzzing from the end of the call. She replayed every second in her mind. Had she said anything foolish? Had she crossed a line? Or had he really meant what he said? As she cleaned up and returned to her shift, her body moved through the motions, but her mind stayed back in that moment, looping through every word. She had spent years perfecting her French in silence, in shadows, and now someone had finally heard her, someone who could change everything. The next morning was colder than the last. Safani clung to the sidewalks as Sandra made her way to work. Her steps slower, her heart heavier. The memory of Henry Remington appearing in the break room lingered. Had she embarrassed herself? By 600 am, she had clocked in as usual. But something was off. Her supervisor, Mr. Callan, barely looked at her when handing the schedule. Minutes later, he returned, face unreadable. "Human Resources wants to see you," he said. Sandra's stomach dropped. "Now?" He nodded. The walk to HR felt like an eternity. Her palms were slick with sweat. She knocked softly on the frosted glass door labeled Valerie Green. "Director, Human Resources. Come in." A voice replied inside. Valerie sat at her desk, spine straight, expression unreadable. "Sandra, please sit down." Sandra obeyed, heart pounding. "You've been reassigned," Valerie said plainly. Sandra blinked. I'm sorry. You're being moved out of housekeeping, effective immediately." Her stomach churned. Had someone complained? Had she broken protocol by speaking French? She swallowed. "Am I being let go?" Valerie's eyes softened. No, quite the opposite." She handed Sandra a crisp envelope. Inside, a letter of appointment. Position, International Guest Relations Assistant. Effective immediately. Salary, $67. 500.00 cents per annum. Sandra stared at the paper, speechless. "I don't understand," she murmured. "Mr. Remington requested this himself," Valerie said. "He believes your skills are being wasted. He'd like to meet with you this afternoon on 1:00. Sandra nodded slowly, gathered the letter, and stepped out of the office in a daze. The hallway looked the same, yet everything felt different. She returned to the staff room, packed up her few belongings in silence. She thought of all those nights studying, of the voice recordings, of being invisible. Her hands trembled, but no tears came. She walked to the parking lot, unsure of what to do next. Then she heard a voice, "Miss Alvarez." She turned. "Mr. Remington would like to see you now." Sandra followed the uniformed man through polished halls she'd never entered, soft lighting, oak paneling, frosted glass. At the end stood a door. "Henry Remington, Chief Executive Officer." The assistant opened it. Sandra stepped inside. Henry stood by the window, hands in his pockets, watching the skyline. He turned slowly. "Close the door, please." She did. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then, in fluent French, he asked, "Are you really fluent?" Sandra hesitated, then replied softly, "I hope so." He nodded. It was more than fluency, it was emotion. "I heard it." She looked down. "You studied for years?" "Since I was 16, mostly on my own." "I've created a new position," he said. "You'll work with international guests, assist with language coordination, and help shape our global experience." Her brow furrowed. "I've never worked in guest relations. I don't have a degree in hospitality." Henry gave a faint smile. "I'm not hiring you for your resume. I'm hiring you because you have something you can't fake: voice, instinct, empathy." She remained quiet, overwhelmed. "The salary is triple what you make now," he added. Sandra opened her mouth, then closed it. 1,000 questions swirled in her mind. The one thing was clear: someone had finally seen her for who she really was. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes." Henry extended his hand. "Welcome to the other side." As they shook hands, he added, voice quiet, "I used to clean rooms too, long before this." He gestured around the office. "I believe in people no one sees." The transformation was quiet but undeniable. Sandra stood in front of the mirror in the executive staff dressing room. No longer in her faded housekeeping uniform but in a navy moon-sheath dress and tailored blazer. Her badge now read International Guest Relations S. Alvarez. pearl studs in her ears. Hair pulled into a neat buns, he looked like someone new. Someone who belonged. As the elevator rose to the 12th floor, the executive wing, she steadied her breath. The doors opened to velvet carpeting and the scent of jasmine. She passed former colleagues who whispered as she walked by, "That's her, right? She used to clean the bathrooms. Wonder what she did to get that job." Sandra kept walking. She had earned this. Her new role moved fast: meetings, briefings at Tower of Briefings, late-night calls with embassies. She worked closely with Henry, especially during negotiations involving international clients. That was when Victoria Langston took notice. Victoria, Vice President of Global Operations, was sharp, strategic, and exuded control. For years she had shared a close, uncertain proximity to Henry. Now she watched Sandra like a challenge had entered her arena. "You're the new translator?" she asked one morning, smiled tight. "Yes, ma'am. Guest relations and language coordination. I hope your skills go beyond French. Mr. Remington expects a lot." "I speak 4 languages," Sandra said calmly. "Learning a 5th. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something in her posture stiffened. Despite the tension, Sandra thrived. She navigated cultural nuances with empathy, handled tense situations with grace. Clients trusted her. Henry noticed he paused in meetings to hear her thoughts. He smiled more genuinely, and leaned in when she spoke. Whatever was growing between them, neither spoke of it. Sandra remained professional, guarded but steady. Then came the Geneva investors. The project involved a luxury retreat in the Swiss Alps. The stakes were high, and tensions had already strained early talks. Victoria chaired the meeting. Henry sat beside her. Sandra stood behind, ready to translate. Monsieur Lamoine, the Swiss lad, made a remark in French, metaphorical and sharp. The translator muttered to Victoria, "He's insulting the foundation. Says it's outdated." Victoria tensed. Sandra stepped forward. "If I may," she said calmly. What he actually said was, "There is strength in the original structure. It only needs a new skin to breathe again." It's not criticism, it's a poetic compliment. Monsieur Lemoine's eyes met hers. He smiled. Perfectly interpreted. The tone shifted. The conversation relaxed. Laughter replaced tension. By the meeting's end, the deal was back on track. As the room cleared, Victoria remained seated, her eyes on Sandra like a strategist reassessing the board. Later, as Henry and Sandra walked a quiet hallway, he said, "You saved that meeting. I just listened a little harder." No, he said. "You listened differently. That's the difference." She met his gaze. "Is that why you picked me?" He stopped. "No, I picked you because you speak with your heart. That kind of fluency is rare." Sandra didn't answer. But as she walked beside him, something deep within her whispered, "You're not invisible anymore." The sun was low and golden when the car pulled up to the edge of the construction site in Brooklyn. Dust clung to the air, and the scent of cement and steel drifted on the late afternoon breeze. Sandra stepped out, heels clicking softly on gravel before she traded them for the work boots a site manager handed her. Across the lot, Henry stood beside an architect. Blueprint rolled under one arm. Jacket off, sleeves rolled up. He turned when he saw her, and the tension in his face softened. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I thought this was a job for engineers." She teased lightly. "It is, but I trust your instincts more than half the consultants," he replied. Besides, you see things people miss." They walked together past half-constructed walls and scaffolded pillars. The property was the future site of the newest Remington Grand, glass and wood, eco-forward, designed to be less opulent and more intimate. A new direction. A new chapter. As they rounded the corner to a quieter stretch where wild grass still grew, the city seemed to recede into silence. They paused near a chain-link fence, looking out toward the river. The sound of traffic was distant now, like another world entirely. Henry exhaled long and slow. "You ever get tired of how loud everything is and yet no one's really saying anything?" Sandra glanced at him, curious. "You mean?" He shrugged. "I mean the noise, the meetings, the networking, the press releases. Everyone's speaking, But none of it means anything. I get tired of people who say what they think they're supposed to say, who smile for the wrong reasons, who listen only to respond. She was quiet for a moment. Then softly, "That's why I started learning languages." He looked at her. She continued, "Because I needed to understand what people really meant. And because I didn't want to be fooled by pretty words anymore." Henry tilted his head, studying her face. "Did someone fool you?" "Not just one person," Sandra replied. "Not bitter but honest. People assumed things, decided who I was before I opened my mouth, my accent, my clothes, my job. They wrote my story for me. I started learning new words so I could rewrite it myself." Henry nodded slowly. "You're rewriting it beautifully." They stood in silence for a while. A gust of wind blew across the lot, rustling blueprints and loose wrappers. Sandra tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Henry glanced at her hands. "You ever miss doing something with your hands?" he asked. She laughed. What? Like scrubbing bathrooms?" "I used to fix faucets at a motel in New York," he said. "I miss that. Things were simpler. You knew if something was broken. You knew how to fix it." "And now?" she asked. He said, "I don't know if anything's truly fixable. Not people, not trust." Sandra didn't respond immediately. Instead, she knelt and picked up a small wildflower growing through a crack in the pavement. She held it between her fingers. "Maybe we're not supposed to fix everything," she said. "Maybe we're just supposed to stay and listen. That's enough sometimes." He looked at her, eyes shaded by the lowering sun. "They're different, Sandra," she shrugged. "I've been called worse." No, he said. "I mean it." Their eyes met. This time, the silence between them felt deliberate, charged. It lingered. Sandra looked away first. Not out of discomfort but to catch her breath. "I should probably head back," she said. Henry nodded. "I'll have the driver take you." But neither moved right away. Before she turned, he said quietly, "You make this place feel less empty." Sandra blinked, taken off guard. She didn't answer, but the corners of her mouth lifted slightly. That evening, as the car took her home, Sandra stared out the window, the city rolling by in warm hues and shadows. She did not replay conversations or worry about implications. She just remembered the way his voice had softened, the way his eyes had stayed on hers, just a moment too long, and for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder. Not as a girl who cleaned rooms, but as a woman standing in her own story. What might happen if neither of them turned away? Next time it was a crisp Wednesday morning when Henry invited Sandra to accompany him to the Brooklyn site again. The construction had progressed since their last visit, framework rising, scaffolding climbing the sky, and the sound of drills and metal echoing across the lot. Sandra wore a hard hat this time, along with the Remington branded safety vest that hung loosely over her fitted blazer. She smiled when she saw Henry, already deep in conversation with the project foreman. He looked up as she approached and smiled back, an expression that had grown easier between them, less guarded. "Ready to walk the future?" he asked. "I'll try not to trip on it," she replied with a soft laugh. They moved through the skeletal structure of what would soon be a luxury retreat. The project represented a new vision, urban sanctuary with minimalist charm. Sandra asked about the rooftop garden plans and suggested using multi-angled wayfinding signs to help international guests feel welcome. Henry listened intently, nodding. As always, her thoughts were practical, insightful, and layered with empathy. The tour continued toward the southern wing. Workers moved briskly around them, hoisting beams, checking levels. Sandra tilted her head, eyes drawn to the latticework above. "I did not realize they'd already started on the third floor," she noted. "They're ahead of schedule," Henry said. "We pushed this phase forward after Geneva confirmed funding." He turned to point at the exposed stairwell behind them when a sharp cracking sound sliced through the air. It was subtle at first, barely audible under the noise of the site. But Sandra heard it. She looked up. A wooden support beam had split, and a load of concrete bricks, secured poorly, was tipping at an angle from a high scaffold. Time slowed. Henry was directly beneath it. Sandra's eyes widened. "Henry!" she shouted without thinking. Without hesitation she lunged toward him. He turned just in time to see her rushing at him, arms outstretched, a look of raw fear in her eyes. She hit him hard, shoving him to the side with her full weight. They both stumbled to the ground. A split-second later, the bundle of bricks slammed down. There was a sickening crunch, then silence. Sandra lay crumpled beside him, unmoving. Blood poured from the side of her head, staining her white blouse in vivid red. Henry scrambled to his knees, his breath caught in his throat. No, oh no. Sandra. Sandra. He pulled off her hard hat, his hands trembling. Blood was already pooling beneath her. Her eyes were closed, lashes sticky with dust and sweat. He pressed his hands to her wound, not knowing what else to do. Help, he bellowed. Someone call an ambulance now. A crowd gathered. The foreman radioed for emergency services. A medic on site ran forward, but Henry would not let go. She saved me, he murmured, dazed. She pushed me. The sirens wailed in the distance. But all Henry could hear was his own heartbeat thudding in his ears and the sound of her shallow, fading breath. The waiting room outside the intensive care unit was quiet, sterile, cold. Henry sat slouched in a plastic chair, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. His suit was wrinkled, blood-stained at the sleeves. He had not changed. He had not moved. The nurse had told him, "She's in a coma. There's swelling in the brain. We'll know more in 24 to 48 hours. But time meant nothing now. The world beyond that glass door did not exist. His phone buzzed with calls from directors, lawyers, investors. He ignored them all. Victoria Langston arrived an hour later, her heels sharp against the hospital tile. Her eyes flickered to the blood on Henry's clothes, to the haunted look on his face. "I heard," she said, voice subdued. "Is she?" "She's not dead," he replied flatly, without looking at her. Victoria paused. "Do they know how it happened?" He turned to her slowly, his expression hardening. "They will." She tried to keep her face neutral. "I'm just glad you're okay." Henry looked through her, past her, almost. "Don't pretend you care," he said quietly. Victoria's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." No, he said. "What's not fair is that a woman who only wanted to help people is lying unconscious in there because someone wanted her out of the way." She flinched just slightly. Henry saw it. "I don't know what you're suggesting," she said, a little too quickly. "I'm not suggesting anything," he replied. "I'm promising if someone planned this, if someone let it happen, I will find out." She said nothing. He stood. "I'm done playing polite." Victoria opened her mouth to speak, but he was already walking toward the ICU again. Inside, Sandra lay still. Machines beeped in measured rhythm. Her head was bandaged, her face pale beneath bruises. Henry sat beside her, took her hand gently. "You saved my life," he whispered. "And I might lose my mind if I lose you." His voice cracked. "This wasn't supposed to happen. I never got to tell you that." He stopped, pressed her hand to his forehead. "Please come back," he breathed. "Please." The man who ran boardrooms, who built empires, now sat in silence, broken, beside a woman who had given everything to protect him, and all he could do now was wait. The hospital room was dim, lit only by the soft blue glow of machines and the steady blink of monitors. Sandra lay motionless in the bed, head wrapped in layers of white gauze, her skin pale and fragile under the fluorescent lights. Tubes snaked from her arms, and the slow rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the only sign that time was still moving. Henry sat beside her, the chair pulled as close as it could go. His suit jacket was folded neatly on the windowsill, his tie gone. He had not been back to the office in days. His assistant had brought a change of clothes, but he barely acknowledged it. All that mattered was here. Every evening he arrived without fail. Always after the doctors had finished their rounds. Always alone. He held her hand, speaking in low tones as if not to disturb the delicate silence that surrounded her. "Do you know how terrified I was when I saw you fall?" he whispered one night, voice raw. "One second you were standing there, and the next you were on the ground. And there was blood, so much blood." He paused, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. His eyes were red-rimmed but dry now, drained from days without rest. "I've seen people die," he continued. I've lost colleagues, family, but I've never cried for anyone, not until I saw your blood on my hands. The words hung in the room like incense, slow to fade. Then something shifted. A tear, small, almost imperceptible, slid from the corner of Sandra's closed eye. Henry froze. "Doctor," he called out, his voice shaking. A nurse rushed in, followed by a young resident. They checked her vitals, examined the tear, watched the subtle twitch of her fingers. It was not consciousness. Not yet, the resident explained. But this is a good sign. It means her brain is reacting emotionally, even if she can't wake up yet. Henry nodded, unable to speak. That night, when the room quieted again, he leaned in close. "Please fight," he whispered. "Come back. I need you to hear what I haven't said." While Sandra lay in silence, Henry moved behind the scenes quietly, methodically. He hired a private investigator, someone he trusted, someone discreet. He wanted answers, and he wanted the truth unfiltered. What the investigator uncovered in less than a week chilled him. Victoria Langston had known about the faulty scaffold. Worse, she had signed off on the rushed construction without proper inspections, pushing deadlines for the sake of impressing investors. It was negligence at best. At worst it was deliberate. There were emails, internal memos. A whistleblower from the contracting company who had been pressured into silence. Henry took it all, the documents, the testimonies, the photos, and he waited for the right moment. It came on a Monday morning. The entire executive board of Remington Grand was gathered in the high-glass conference room downtown. Press had been called for a strategic announcement. Victoria, in heels and a steel gray suit, stood at the head of the table, smiling confidently. She believed she was about to be promoted. Henry walked in, calm, composed, but his eyes burned with something no one had seen before, pure seething resolve. "Before we begin," he said, "there's something the company and the world deserves to know." He handed a flash drive to the IT assistant. A series of slides began to play on the massive screen: internal emails, inspection failures, falsified reports. Gasps filled the room. Victoria's expression faltered. "Henry, what is this?" "You know exactly what it is," he said coldly. "You endangered lives. You covered it up. And one woman, one brilliant, selfless woman, is lying in a hospital bed because of you." Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed. "Security," Henry said, turning to the doorway. "Please escort Miss Langston out. The authorities will meet her in the lobby." Victoria stood frozen for a second, then finally moved, face tight, jaw clenched, surrounded by guards as the room buzzed with shock and fallout. Henry took a breath. The decision cost him potential investors. It shook the board. But it did not matter, because Sandra's life mattered more, and she had nearly lost it protecting his. Now it was his turn to protect her with everything he had. The first thing Sandra felt was warmth. Steady, familiar. Then came sound, the gentle beep of a monitor, footsteps in the hallway, and a voice she barely recognized. "Sandra, if you can hear me, come back." Her eyelids fluttered open, heavy from weeks of unconsciousness. Blurred shapes sharpened into view, white walls, soft lighting, a window cracked open to let in the spring air. And there he was. Henry sat beside her, thinner than she remembered, his once crisp suit now wrinkled, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but his hand was in hers like it had been all along. When her fingers moved just slightly, he gasped. "Sandra," he whispered, leaning closer. She gave a faint nod. He pressed her hand to his lips, voice shaking. "You're awake. You're really awake." Her throat burned, but she managed to whisper, "I haven't given up." Henry let out a quiet, tearful laugh. "And I never gave up on you." Her lips curled into the smallest smile. Their fingers stayed laced, like a vow spoken without words. In the following weeks, Sandra's strength returned little by little. Henry visited every day, bringing flowers, books, and once a sketch someone had drawn of her saving him. She read slowly, practiced walking again, regained her voice. When she came back to the Remington Grand, it was not with a mop or a name badge that read housekeeping. This time, She walked through the front doors as the newly appointed Director of International Relations. The news traveled fast. The woman who once cleaned bathrooms was now guiding the future of the brand. But to those who knew her story, it was no surprise. Sandra had earned every inch of her rise with quiet grit and unshakable grace. Henry remained CEO. But it was no longer a one-person empire. They were partners now in vision, in leadership, in life. Together they launched new hotels in Paris, Toronto, and Rio de Janeiro. Each bore Sandra's touch: inclusive hiring, multilingual signage, community outreach woven into every floor plan. But Sandra's proudest project was one born from memory. She proposed a nonprofit, Voices Without Borders, offering free language education and job training for immigrants across the U.S. The first center opened in Brooklyn, just blocks from the public library where she had once studied French under flickering lights late one evening. Long after everyone else had gone home, Sandra stood in her office overlooking Manhattan. Henry entered quietly, setting a cup of tea beside her. "You're going to wear yourself out," he said gently. "I know, I want to say to you for joining me," she replied, her voice soft. "But this view, it reminds me I made it." "You didn't just make it," Henry said. "You changed it." She smiled, then opened her desk door and took out the small silver voice recorder. Worn from years of use, Henry recognized it instantly. "Is that my mom's?" she said. She pressed play. The recording crackled. Then a voice spoke. Gentle, like and gentle. Strong, mi chica, ma chica. "If one day you can do what you love and love someone who sees you, then my soul will rest easy." Henry stood still, moved. Sandra whispered, Mom, thank you for joining me." "I did it. And that man, oh. You'd love him." She looked at Henry. He stepped closer, took her hand in his, and held it tight, just like he had in the ICU. And as they stood together in the quiet glow of the city, there was no fear, no doubt, only the peace of knowing they were home. The Remington name, once stood for luxury, now stood for something more. Under Henry and Sandra's leadership, the company expanded into a global brand, not just admired for its 5-star service, but for its 5-star humanity. The hotels were elegant, yes, but also inclusive spaces designed to welcome, uplift, and represent the voices of those often overlooked. It was Sandra who led the shift, bringing her story into every boardroom and blueprint. She insisted on hiring multilingual staff from immigrant backgrounds, designed in-house language training programs, and pushed for their signature outreach, the Alvarez Foundation, named in honor of her mother. The foundation offered free education in foreign languages, job training, and career development for immigrants trying to rebuild their lives. It was her life in reverse, offering the ladder she had once had to climb alone. At the heart of it all was the new community center in East Harlem, a bright, modern facility that would serve as a safe haven and resource hub for disadvantaged women, especially single mothers, refugees, and survivors of abuse. On opening day, the crowd gathered beneath a large white canopy. Staff, partners, donors, and community members stood shoulder to shoulder. Children waved little flags with the foundation's logo, a simple open book inside a heart. Sandra stood at the podium, sunlight catching the soft beige of her silk blouse. Her voice, when it came, was steady but warm. "When I first came to this city," she began in English, "I had one suitcase, a handful of words, and a dream that felt much too big for someone like me." She paused, eyes scanning the crowd. "But languages saved me. They became my tools, my bridge, my way out of silence." She switched to French. "It is thanks to this language that I found my path and my voice." Then to Spanish, "And thanks to the love my mother gave me, I keep walking this path." Applause rose, and Sandra stepped back slightly, blinking fast. Behind her, Henry stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, watching with a look only she would recognize. It was the look of a man who once saw a girl wiping fingerprints off a crystal tray and somehow knew this one could change everything. Later that evening, back in their apartment overlooking the city, Sandra stood alone by the window. The skyline shimmered in gold and cobalt, lights blinking like stars. She reached into the drawer and pulled out the recorder, its silver body dull with age but still functional. She pressed play. Her mother's voice, soft but clear, filled the room. My daughter, if one day you can do what you love and love someone who sees you, I will rest in peace. Sandra stood quietly, her eyes glassy not with sorrow but with gratitude. She whispered, Mom, I am loved. I have my own voice. And I am using it just like you hoped. You can rest now. Behind her, she felt a presence. Henry wrapped his arms gently around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. He did not speak. He did not need to. They stood like that for a long time, watching the world outside. The lights of the city blinked below, not just electricity, not just steel and glass. It was home, not because it welcomed them from the start, but because they had built a place where they truly belonged together. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. What would you have done in Sandra's place? Would you have answered that phone in French? Would you have dared to dream even while holding a mop? Sandra's journey reminds us that one moment, one voice, can change everything. It is not about where we start, but who we choose to become and who believes in us along the way. If you believe in stories that heal, that inspire, and that remind us of the beauty in resilience and love, subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories. Because here, we do not just tell stories, we tell your story. Subscribe now and never miss a tale that might just change the way you see the world.